Dear all, welcome to the Feral Palace Conference, which is held in Mladinsko Theater. As you can see, ferals invaded Mladinsko Gledališče. We moved here from Krater, which is just a few meters along the road. Feral Palace Conference is actually a conference dedicated to the Feral Palace program, which during March, April, and May this year joined creatives from 9 different countries, ecologists, lawyers, landscape architects, biologists, and many different profiles to work on a challenging questions and produce a really thoughtful and diverse strategies which will be presented tomorrow at the conference. This round table, Practices of Care, is a warm-up which is moderated by our dear friend and colleague Katja Martinčič, who is one of the most progressive urbanists in Slovenia, not urbanist, architect working as a city urbanist, and the most beautiful city urbanist, definitely. Yeah. So I will pass the word to her and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Danica. Funny as always. I'll start now with the serious talk, okay? So let's start with the practices of care. There is a rising number of community-led public greens in Ljubljana and other European cities. Awareness about the meaning of quality public space is rising. We are here today to look closer into good practices and learn more about the impact of civic engagement in the management of degraded spaces in the context of the city. We are hosting representatives of local initiatives and experts on topics from Slovenia, Belgrade and Amsterdam. I'll start with a short introduction. So we have here Urška Jurman. She's a curator and a critic, and Polonca Lovšin, who is an architect and an artist, and they are both active members of Kud Obrat, and this is where the initiative for community garden on Resljeva Street started in 2010. Garden beyond the construction site is an example of temporary use of space in the city center. Pioneering initiative survived for a very long time. The space has become an important green island in the neighborhood. Then here we have Debra Solomon. She's an Amsterdam-based artist and founder of Urbanihoeve, social design lab for urban agriculture, and that translates as the city as our farm. She has developed food system infrastructures at several public space locations in The Hague and Amsterdam, transforming the existing landscape architecture while prioritizing ecosystem health and implementing in situ topsoil production. Here is also Gaja Mežnarič-Osole. She's an eco-social designer who has been running the Trajna Association together with Andrej Koruza since 2017. Trajna creates opportunities for questioning established strategies for addressing the problem of invasive plants. The latest achievement of the association is the establishment of the Krater Creative Lab in an overgrown construction pit in Ljubljana. Krater is an emerging production space for transdisciplinary practices. She was joined by Primož, so I will ask her to introduce him, because I don't want to be unfair.
Thank you, Katja. Yes, besides me is sitting Primož Turanšek, our dear colleague and a microbiologist who is also having huge expertise in permaculture. And at Krater we're collaborating together on many projects, but he's the most dedicated like representative of the mycolab. So he works with mycelia and biocomposites of mycelia.
Thank you. And we are also waiting for Iva Čukić to join us from Belgrade. She will be on the screen behind. In the meantime, I can still introduce her. She's an architect and urban planner from Belgrade, as I said. And the areas of her research include public space, self-organization, DIY philosophy, and urban cultural discourse. In 2010, she co-launched one of the first initiatives aimed at fostering citizens' participation in urban development, called Ministry of Space, Ministarstvo prostora. Main goal of the group is initiating dialogue between citizens, social activists, urban developers, architects, and city officials about the development of the city. And sadly, in this case, I'm the city official, actually. Okay, our focus tonight will be the third landscape, as Gilles Clement described, and maybe with a little stretch, not exactly by his definition. That would be the third landscape as an abandoned territory, an exploited site where no function is determined by human being. That could be an empty plot, sloped terrain, former industrial area, random edge of the road, green or gray in the process of change, that was somehow forgotten by the cartographers and not interesting or valuable enough for certain politics and therefore remain uncultivated, if I may use this word. So sometimes we find spaces like that in the city center, and more often they occur as somewhat a boundary between two types of land use. For example, between settlement or industrial land and rural land. We talk about border space, which is often also connected with pollution, neglect, sometimes even poverty. It's kind of wasteland. However undecided, third landscape have a great potential to host unexpected and unrecognized biodiversity. Architecture is sadly also a power play. To design and build a house, a road, or a park means to change a certain environment in order to serve someone very specific, human beings, that is. In the face of climate change, accompanied by a serious decline in biodiversity, I dare to say that it's about time to change the practice. So the question is, how do we design and build houses, landscapes, and communities in order to preserve and include the third landscape as the common space of the future? But first, let's get to know each other a little bit better. So everyone here on stage works in a similar field, but in many different ways. Could you please introduce your work a little bit and describe the main core of your action and your agenda? So please explain your practice a little bit, your current practice, and Gaia, can you start maybe?
Okay. Yeah, as you said, together with Primož, we come from Krater, which is one of the oldest construction pits in Slovenia, so to speak. Krater has 18,000 square meters of land, and it hasn't been, let's say, like drastically intervened with humans for the past 26 years. There were two small interventions happening in those times, and one of them was that a huge excavation of gravel was happening to build a residential area next to the Krater site. That's why also Krater has its name after the crater. And the second one was the mowing of all the vegetative plants in 2017. So what people can experience today on Krater is actually the work of nature in the past 5 years. Only the huge trees actually stayed from back when there was an artillery barrack happening, destroyed. I was in 1996, I believe, and we also have like these huge chestnuts from those times of the Austro-Hungarian artillery barracks. So a group of people who were sort of connected to exploring this sort of anthropogenic and like post-industrial landscapes gather around by an initiative of Trajna. As you mentioned, together with Andrea and Sebastian, we were for a couple of years working on the field of invasive plants, and somehow when we started to develop the products, we were thinking, okay, it's really interesting to think of the biomass and how we can actually apply this biomass to serve the community. which is abandoned and nobody wants to use somehow because it's invasive. But it was kind of not enough for us. We wanted to apply this regenerative aspect towards it, and in this regard it was important for us to inhabit one of such ecosystems, to be like more close in relation to it. And for that, Trajna could never do it alone. That's why we connected with Slovenian Association of Permaculture, more particularly with Primož, and then with prostora architects. And somehow we have set a production space on the site where the whole idea when we started was that basically we want to work with invasive plants and explore this ecosystem further. But through the time we set up Krater in 2020. Now it's 2022, and already in these 2 years Krater went in many different directions, and we're constantly learning of what this space is and what it can become also now in the light of the new development plans.
Okay, thank you. Can we go to Onkraj gradbišča maybe to see the first practice?
Onkraj gradbišča, beyond the construction site, it's a community garden, started at 2010, also in a closed construction pit in the city center, actually close to the main train and bus station in Ljubljana. We started as part of a cultural festival as a temporary spatial practice. Basically, the initiators, it's a cultural and artistic association. Obrad, our initial idea was to make this area accessible to the local inhabitants living around, because this closed construction pit, it has been closed before we entered for more than 10 years. It's really in the middle of a residential area. And also when we started, it was the beginning of financial economical crisis, where when a lot of investor companies went bankrupt, and a lot of these kind of investment projects went on hold, and this was one of these stories. And according to our understanding at that time, it was for us important that the city of Ljubljana, who is the owner of this area, doesn't treat the land as a real estate on hold for a better times, when the city could sell it again for a better price, but also to look at this land from the perspective of a quality of everyday life. So this was our initial push to make the place, the area accessible, and to develop the use of it also in a communication with the people living around, for whom we kind of envisioned that it could be useful or welcome. So when we got the temporary permission to enter, actually we started first to explore where we came actually. One of the first activities was a guide tour by one layman on wild plants, to learn actually what is already existing there, where we entered. And then also at that time we were not familiar with the concept that you introduced at the beginning of third landscape, but somehow intuitively, I would say, as a really kind of careful temporary visitors or guests in this place, we really took care of also what was growing there. So the trees, when we entered, were really low, and we kind of protected them not to ruin them and things like that. And we, as let's say self-grown spatial practice, we were really kind of intuitively careful how to coexist with what is already also self-grown there on this location. So yeah, this was our beginning. And through the conversation, through the process, actually, the content for urban gardening developed. So people very much express this wish to have a connection with the soil, to garden close to their homes, because one has to be aware also that the municipality of Ljubljana at that time also launched their, let's say, first case examples of city allotment gardens, and also mostly they were really on the periphery of Ljubljana, and for people living in the city center it was very hard to come in contact and possibility to garden. So this was actually our beginning, the community gardening on a closed construction site.
Okay, thank you. And Deborah, you worked on many locations.
Yes.
So maybe you can explain about one which is the most important to you, or the recent one.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I work together with my colleague Renata Nolan and about 70 other local people in the municipality, and 70 people from the Amsterdam Bijlmer, Amsterdam Southeast. We collaborate together with the municipality of Amsterdam. And in 2018, so this is the most recent project, we started developing this food forest Amsterdam Southeast. The acronym is FABAZO. Seeing all of the public space in this very urban part of the city with very dense, beautiful architecture from between the 60s and 80s. It's now even a protected cityscape. We started to see this green space in between the grass, the shrubs, the micro woodlands, and the tree canopy as a potential space for a food forest. And we chose this space because it can connect the ecological framework outside the built environment of Amsterdam to the ecological framework and build it up and connect it to another park. And so we originally started working with the notion that we would have this connected space, and that all these different treatments using the existing green infrastructure. So the trees were already there, the woodlands were already there, but we wanted to increase certain kinds of edge landscapes, and we wanted to increase biodiversity and food production, not only for humans, but also for the multi-species whole. And we also recognized in this period that we would need to do this by changing the mowing regime. There were lots of lawns, and these lawns were partially used for playing football, but only a really small portion, and the rest of them are just the green that some landscape architect along this very long architectural project of the Bijlmer of Amsterdam Southeast had painted in with certain ideas. In fact, the original green structure was intended to be very wild, and this area was designed as a grand projet of dense housing, but beautiful, and that people could affordably live with these fantastic greenscapes. And certain strange ideas about landscape architecture and the natural realm that are present in urbanism, in landscape architecture, in architecture, and also from the municipality had dictated that spaces with any kind of social problem needed to be somehow castrated into and mown within an inch of their life. So, but this was not the original plan of the landscape architect Siegfried Nasut. And so we started to go a long journey of having to collaborate, the long journey of collaboration with the municipality to make these spaces more productive, with also human foods, semi-dwarf fruit trees in semi-orcharded spaces, and not exactly rewild, but a different mowing regime that's mimicking grazing patterns, ecological mowing we call it, phased mowing, to connect this space in a sensible way to increase biodiversity so that it can connect these two spaces.
Okay, later on you will give me the recipe to how to convince people who work at the municipality to stop mowing the grass all the time, because somehow they think that this prevents vandalism. You know, cutting the trees and mowing the grass, that will scare the vandalism away. Probably doesn't work like that, but I think that in the meanwhile Eva joined us. Is that true or not? Can we hear her maybe? No? Okay, I'll wait a little bit then. Gaia, I'd like to hear more from you. And you said before, you talked about regenerative practice. What does that exactly mean? Could you please explain that a little bit more to us who have no idea?
Yes, and then I will ask Primož maybe to add. So I think like the whole idea of regeneration is kind of to move a step forward from the sustainability. So basically to move away from only sustaining certain status quo to actually thinking about how we can put back and make it better. So put back to nature or give back to nature and make the environment better. In a sense, I think like that's a very kind of urgent need that the planet needs if like we're kind of damaging and extracting the ecosystems which kind of provide for our living, then it's some sort of I think natural response that needs to happen in order to kind of sustain our livelihoods basically. And more particularly in Krater, I think there are many ways in which we're trying to approach this aspect of regeneration, and it's a constant research also for us what that actually means and how do we want to direct our energies, because the work is enormous. But one of the examples that I can give, and maybe you can then give some others, is that we started to, there was like quite an interesting incident happening last summer, because there was, they started to rebuild Dunajska Street, which is bordering the Krater construction site, and somehow it seemed that Krater was the most convenient place to put the soil which was extracted out from the road. So suddenly we were kind of a bit worried at some point that we will lose Krater because the soil was just piling on and on and on. And what that actually then made as a consequence, because basically when the owner of the plot, Ministry of Justice, realized that we have this extra soil suddenly on the site, they understood that if this soil is not moved away in 1 year, it can become a dangerous material, so to speak. So they could be in trouble. So they ordered big trucks to enter from another site on the construction site, and the trucks started to compact the land, and kind of made extra paths. But really, as we were trying to kind of really keep the biodiversity happening, the self-spontaneous meadows, alive, it was happening, I think, in autumn, so like the vegetation was not in full life, so like it was not, the green parts were not available, let's say, and somehow, anyhow, they compacted some of the plots of land, and there was another thing which happened, and was because of the new plans that will happen. So the Palace of Justice will be is planned to be built on the site. The archaeologists also came to investigate the site, so they also digged on the places where the meadows are present at the moment. So you can see like this sort of kind of interventions happened that were opposing our kind of idea that we want to keep the biodiversity on the site. So with Primož then we were talking like what could be a regenerative move towards those interventions, and we started to plant seeds in the springtime, right, last year. So one of the things is that we collect the seeds when they're ripe from the site, and then we, when the moment is right, kind of replant them back. The other thing is that we were kind of ordering also the wood chips, sort of tried to create new soil on the sites where the soil was kind of too compacted. And it was really interesting to see how one big plot of land, compacted plot of land this year, you know, like amazingly reflourished, and we're continuing to do the process. So this is just like one of the interventions that it's really easy to explain, and I think it's also, it has this visual impact. You can, you know, explain to people somehow that that it's possible, and it works really, really well in this regard. But maybe you want to say something in addition to that.
Yeah, maybe if I add some little information. For example, when we were selecting seeds, we were also selecting seeds of plants that, for example, are nitrogen fixers, so they are adding additional nutrients to the soil. They grow fast, so they produce a lot of biomass. There are flowering plants that produce a lot of pollen and nectar for the pollinators. And for example, that they are adapted to the drought or to the dry conditions, because Krater is quite a dry place in the summer. And because there is a lot of gravel underneath, and the soil is really porous, and the water goes away quite fast. And yeah, this is one example of the regenerative practice. But for me, example, the regenerative practices were introduced to me from permaculture, because I think the permaculture in itself is a regenerative practice. And I think that the main point of all of the regenerative practices is that you first have to think about your effect that you have on the environment around you. And yeah, I think this is, and that you try to have an effect that is beneficial not only to you, but also to the other humans around you, and also all the other organisms living around you. Because if we live in the time of environmental crisis, and climate change is happening and stuff like that, we really start to have thinking about what kind of effect we as individuals have on our environment, but also what effect do we have as a society on the environment. Because yeah, as Gaia mentioned before, sustainability or zero effect is not enough anymore. We have caused so much damage that we have to start to repair this damage. And this is basically the core notion of all of the regenerative practices, I think. And yeah, for example, one example from Krater would also be I don't know, composting toilet, for example, which is quite something that people like to talk about it, or you know, it's like, because it's dealing basically with human feces and stuff like that, and this is a little bit controversial. And yeah, you can explain on what something so primary as, you know, going to the toilet on one hand, and if you compare the regular toilets with composting toilets, you can see a lot of, how can I say, what effect, for example, composting toilet has on its environment, and how the fecal matter and nutrients and stuff like that are circulating in the composting toilet, or the regular toilet, when you go to the toilet and you flush the water and you throw away, I don't know, 10 liters of drinking water, for example.
Okay. Thanks for this great explanation. I also think that you talked really well about the fact that we have to understand the place where we are working. So we have to really know the location well before we start doing anything right there. Let me say hi to Eva now, because she joined us. I don't know when exactly, I don't know how much she listened to already, but may I ask you the first question that I have for you?
Yes, please. Hi, everyone. Sorry for not being with you there.
You're welcome anyway. So I introduced you a little bit before you joined us, so I will start with question now. Your practice is urban planning, but on many different levels. And one of the formats in which you operate is called Crisis Headquarters. You work with the local community and help them in understanding city spatial policy. And what is the hot topic? Tell me, where does the city, Belgrade, fail the most, and how do you intervene?
Wow, thanks for that question. So yes, we started as a collective by occupying abandoned public spaces and turning them into some kind of social and cultural venues, but with the idea to introduce that there are different models that can be presented in a way of like democratizing public services, right, and public infrastructures. And then through our career, there was a very controversial project presented in 2014, Belgrade Waterfront project, where we basically established this massive political and social movement against this development. Why I'm mentioning it? Because through that particular project and our work, we managed to politicize the question of urban planning. And suddenly it became important for a lot of people in Belgrade, for a wider public, I would say. So in the last few years, the issues of urban development became kind of a burning issues. So the people gathered in their neighborhoods and start fighting against unwanted development. And that's where we jump in. So either we reach out to them with like informing them about the current plan and their location, or they reach out to us. We named this format Crisis Headquarters because we like to play with different names, and that was especially popular during first months of Corona. So what we do is we work closely with them both on bureaucratic struggles, like explaining the planning process and how it's going to be run formally, and then how they can organize on the terrain, like from creating a wider group to going to the court, reach out to media, like all these small details that we learned in the last 12 years since we exist. What is the most important, at least what public pool, opinion public pool that we did a year and a half ago showed, is that green infrastructure is one of the most important questions for Belgrade citizens. We did it on the representative sample of citizens, and there is a huge reason for it. So I would say that the current government is kind of somehow hater towards green infrastructure. So they're seeing every single green area as a buildable and profitable space. So there is a massive cutting and like destruction of green spaces, and that's the most burning issue where people gather. We currently have around 12% of the city surface is covered by green spaces, and everything else is basically built-up surface. So it's an alarming situation, especially in this climate situation. And the recent floods that we were facing during the summer showed that we are not actually addressing this issue properly. So in a nutshell, in very short, I would say these are the main issues currently discussed in public.
So the city is basically selling its green spaces to investors. That's what's going on.
Exactly. They are defining green spaces as a construction sites, and agricultural land is also converted into construction sites. So we are losing a lot of green infrastructure in the city.
Okay. Thanks for the insight. We'll come back to that. And now to beyond the construction site again. One thing that is impressive to me is that I remember that time of the crisis when there was a lot of empty building sites in Ljubljana. And there were also a lot of talks about what should be done here, what should be done there. The initiatives were sprouting, but only yours lasted for 10 years. You stayed there, and how did that happen? How did you manage? Because it's not that easy. You also had to talk to the municipality and made arrangements of all kinds, I imagine. So please tell us a little bit about your process.
Yes, the land where we are, our construction site is municipal land. So the owner is municipality, like similar, like no, it's not similar like in your case, but yes, we talked. We had to find out who is the owner of the land, and then we somehow decided that we don't want to squat the space, but that we want to have some kind of legal approach, because we also thought that with this strategy we could maybe influence in general the municipal way of thinking of temporary use of or land or buildings, and that we would somehow contribute with our case, that this would maybe change the municipal approach, which was very protective, of course. They are afraid of people being in temporary use. And so we were somehow proud that we managed to get a contract with the municipality, which we had to extend every year. So I will just correct you that we are now the 12 years there. It doesn't matter, but yes, it's our last year, and we have to, this year we are moving out and somehow concluding this project. Maybe Urša, you now.
Sorry to hear that you have to move out. You have new plot already? You know where are you going? No?
No, I mean, we were, so even though we turned into a community garden, the project, our main focus was not gardening, I would say, but it was this strategy of somehow building a common space together and maintaining it together, and somehow learning about politics, about rights to the city, and in some way what we somehow wanted to achieve, of course, through time. In these 12 years, you can imagine when we entered the space, really the trees were very small, and we just implemented the gardens. But now in these 12 years, this became some kind of park. So we listed almost 120 trees, 119, I think. And yes, so we
small forest, actually.
Yeah, small forest, and of course gardening is not going really well because it's too much shadow and so on. But mainly people who are part of the community, they are not so much interested in gardening itself, but also like just there are a lot of young families with kids, and yeah, just see growing, and also the community aspect is for some what matters.
And also Gaia and Deborah, please could you just tell us who owns the plots where you work?
In our case, the municipality owns the space. It's green space.
And Krater is owned by who exactly?
Krater is owned by the Ministry of Justice, so it's state-owned place. Yeah, and we're as well contracting.
So I can imagine who you talk to when you talk with municipality, but who do you talk with when you talk to the state?
We talk to the infrastructure department of the Ministry of Justice.
Okay, and are they happy to talk to you?
It was really interesting when we started the project, because we were looking for several different plots, right? As I already explained, what was like our initial idea was basically to find a plot where we can experiment and learn, and yeah, develop our own practice out of the main, like how do we say, like square office, closed office, let's say. So we wanted to challenge this aspect of what an office could be, and also there was a lack of productional spaces basically in Ljubljana, so it was another kind of a pool of why did we want to find a space. But anyhow, we were actually, I think, selecting among around 8 different plots, and we've made a workshop sheet where we're going around the locations and making the checks and so on. So it was some sort of evaluation criteria that we have set yeah.
But you did that on your own before you started talking with the state?
Exactly,
also.
yeah.
Okay.
So we were exploring the
So
options,
you
and one was
basically
like
decided
private
what's
owned.
the best for you.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
One was like private owned, one had like a mixed ownership, one was not fenced, and so on. So when we kind of heard about this site, of course, as Polonca was saying, we were firstly checking who is the owner of the site. When we realized that the owner is the Ministry of Justice, my colleague Andrei, I think, called the department, and they called us for a meeting. And we've prepared a presentation. What was actually working in our benefit was the fact that we already had the project set. So we kind of had the European money and the programming done. So when we were
Good tactics.
it's a good tactic if you can use it. And we were privileged to kind of have had the money. So we went to the office. We presented the project, and I think it was also very interesting because a lot of media pressure was already happening around that location. So kind of the Ministry of Justice, I think they had a little bit of this understanding that something maybe needs to happen with the site. And at that point, maybe a few years earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, Urszka, I think there was this law or a policy established which allowed for the ministries or like the public landowners to give the land to the temporary use to the NGOs, right? So something alongside this. So there was like a legal tool which allowed the Ministry of Justice basically to kind of give the land to temporary use to us. In this regard, I think it was a rather easy process to kind of get.
It's unusual story.
The land,
yeah.
but if you ask me how our relationships is developing, it's an ongoing kind of exploration which is happening, and also now in the light of the new development plans, I think we need to re-establish some sort of a way. How do we connect, and how do we find a common language?
I think Deborah and Urszka wants to add something.
Yeah, thank you. I just would like to add, when we talk about the tactics, how to enter these kind of abandoned spaces, and then in our case, in actually all three cases, the public owner of the land, how to approach in the conversation. So in your case, Gaia, you offered some funding behind your practice. In our case, I think was also softening the side of the municipality, the fact that we started within the cultural festival with the support of a known cultural producer which acts in this neighborhood, Zavod Bunker. So this, I think, gave kind of a reassurance to the municipality, that this is somehow a practice to, let's say, give it a try and trust in that sense. But also just to add on what Gaia said regarding the legal frame, regarding temporary use of space in Slovenia. Actually, this legal frame existed since very long, but it's true that maybe it was not so known, familiar to the municipalities or state institutions, because it's true that some years ago actually it got a legal definition as temporary use of space, while before it was handled, let's say, around, but it was also possible as temporary use of space, while now it has also a legal kind of framing.
Thank you for that interesting explanation. In the case of Amsterdam, we also were privileged by relations with the Chief Science Officer of Amsterdam. And public space in Amsterdam is that it's public does not mean that you can do anything to it or that you have any other access besides walking on it or maybe picnicking on it. If you You can't use it as a productive space. You can't redesign it. And actually, well, in our case, there was no trajectory for us to access the space in a legal way, to make changes to the already produced and designed public space. And even in this process, when we made allies through the Office of the Chief Science Officer with the head of Public Works, Green, who was very positive, and the Public Works hygiene of the gray space, very positive. We're fantastic allies on the top of these hierarchical silos of public space. That did not mean that we had access. So there was incredible, this hierarchical structure from which we had access and approval and allies, did not provide per se a trajectory into green space and how it would be maintained. Even today, as we do this, the communication lines between important stakeholders are not open to us, all of them. For example, speaking to a specific holder of a mowing contract to make sure that it gets done correctly the way we prescribed, which is a standard mowing method. It's not an innovated one. So what I'm trying to say, there were no paths to do this. We also had the money ahead of time, and that was kind of funny when we spoke to the person who's in charge of public community gardens. And he said, well, I have to approve this. And I said, well, why? Because we have the money already. We don't need your approval for a budget or anything. In fact, what you do is control the budgets. But who do we speak to make sure that these maintenance regimes can be transformed? And not only did he not connect us, but he didn't know. So within these green maintenance structures, within these public works silos, within the district silos of civil servants, there was not knowledge of the correct path and who should be talking to whom.
And you can give it back to Deborah, because I have one more question for her. Maybe you could actually continue from here. So you observed the age of Anthropocene, that's your research topic, from many different perspectives and locations during your artistic practice. And what would you say? What is the role or the potential of all described locations from today's debate in this age of increasingly unstable condition of our environment?
Well, I'll speak from our case in the Netherlands, but I think it is exactly the same here in Ljubljana. And these spaces, like Fabazo, this 56-hectare space, which is close, 53 hectares, by the way, is, according to research on biodiversity, a minimum amount of connected ecosystem space which can provide the highest level of biodiversity. So you want to have a minimum of that. It's not an isolated woodland, pocket woodland, and an isolated community garden. They're part of the structure of the green infrastructures of the city, and that is the way that they can function. Urbanihoeve works in public space because we see the public space as all this. It's actually the largest space in the city. And what it can mean is cooling down our cities. In Urbanihoeve's outdoor studio in Amsterdam North, there's a 10-degree difference between summer and winter inside the Food Forest studio and outside on the street. In the winter, there is, I don't want to say 10 degrees, but it's a much warmer space, and you can see that on the plants. The seasons of the studio, which is only 1,200 square meters of green space, in a highly paved sort of suburban-ish place, it's a vast difference in biodiversity and temperature and humidity. And this, aside from all of the food production and so forth, this connecting of the nectarways, making habitat for threatened species, this public space that we work in, these quarries, they're connected to the green tissues of the city. In Ljubljana, you can see it very clearly on the map, how Krater is really a hub, and it's part of this green web through the city. In Fabazo in Amsterdam Southeast, it connects these two zones in a very physical way, and we already see species coming back. So these spaces have the potential to produce climate justice. Also in Amsterdam Southeast, even though there are these curated green spaces with very little ecological value, it has a chance for them to have ecological value, to produce food together with the programming of the initiatives that can provide education on how to forage, how to use this food, appropriate recipes for all the different cultures that live there. So it's social justice, climate justice, and ecological, environmental justice. That's what these spaces can provide.
Thank you. And with the last thing that you said, ecological justice, I just wanted to ask Gaia actually if you think that nature has some rights in Ljubljana, and what would those rights be? And after Gaia answers, I would also ask Eva to answer the same question.
If it already has some rights.
Yes, does nature have some rights in the city of Ljubljana?
It's a huge question. Yeah, I think what was really interesting, when we started to explore the case of Krater, was basically that certain types of nature, and it's not only connected to the city of Ljubljana, but I think elsewhere the same, have more rights than the other parts of nature, and Krater is for sure a typology which normally has no rights. These kind of third landscapes, as you were explaining, normally are considered a nuisance, are considered degraded, disturbed areas that needs to be repaired, cultivated, changed, or eradicated in many different ways. But yeah, it's also at the same point interesting that Krater probably, as the third landscape now, has a lot of rights because it has representatives, which is our collective that are working really in line or trying to kind of speak about the presence of all of those multi-species communities that are thriving on the site at the moment. So in that regards, I would say that Krater actually has some rights.
So rights depends on the representatives, kind of, or what? Rights of the nature. That's not. That's a bit wrong, but for now, that's probably what we have, right?
I think there is a great movement now in discourse, kind of really popping out and trying to speak out for those rights of nature all across the planet in different ways. And I think what was also important for us was to connect with Klaas Kuytenbrouwer and his practice of zoonomy, which is actually trying to, I think, stand for the rights of non-human bodies from the organizational point. So basically, he's giving some sort of a methodology for all of the organizations around Europe to kind of develop some sort of a modus operandi how to actually represent the rights of non-humans.
I think Urška also had a comment, or you can wait. So let's go to Eva now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Okay, here you go.
So what is the relation toward nature? Very bad, I would say, like in the previous answer. But to illustrate that, I would like to mention two cases that were happening in the last year and a half. One was the plan for a massive construction on the Belgrade forest called Košutnjak, colloquially called the lungs of Belgrade. For us, very important venue, since many people go there during the year, and also you celebrate birthdays there. You have like everyday relaxation or barbecue or whatever. And the city decided to cut 30% of the forest and to build a massive luxury housing over there. And that decision came in a very unusual moment because we were a few years in the row the most polluted city in the world. If you were following these charts, it was like Belgrade was before Beijing and the cities that are usually in the first few places. So we did a huge campaign to protect Košutnjak, and we managed to to collect around 80,000 signatures in Belgrade for the petition, and also around 8,000 objections on the plan in the early phase of the plan. So for now, it stopped because the majority of Belgrade citizens, no matter to which political spectrum they belong, they are very against this development, but because they have a personal connection to it. That's the difference to the second case study, which is even more important, and that's the area called Makiš. It's where Ada Lake is very close to it, for those who've been in Belgrade, and that is actually the area with the water springs that provides Belgrade with drinkable water. And that area, unfortunately, has been now declared as a construction site, and they start building 4 million square meters of luxury housing and office spaces. Unfortunately, that space was never in people's mind. I mean, of course, we all drink water from the tap. That's something that we still do. But the concrete location was never something that people visited. So it really passed kind of unnoticed. Also, it was in the middle of the highest numbers of Corona in December, and between the Catholic Christmas and New Year's when the plan was adopted. So we lost one enormously important resource for us. You know, we are talking about the water and oxygen. These are things without people cannot survive. And it's very unusual that decision makers make these kind of decisions, like they don't have the same needs like other human beings on the earth.
I'm sorry to say so, but actually that really sounds horrible. We are horrified here. Do you actually have any allies or connections? Who do you talk to? Who do you work with? Where can you go? What can you do?
So the current organizational structures in Belgrade and in Serbia are mostly on the grassroots level and community-based. Unfortunately, the current government is not very difficult to speak with. I would really avoid to speak with the people with such a dossiers and CVs. You know, this is something, I mean, they should end up on another place and not like governing the country. What all the organizations, formal or informal, are doing, we are trying to kind of create ecosystem which is a safe space for all of us and keep us sane. That's very important, but also like empowering and supporting each other and uniting struggles. That's very important. So the struggle for ecological, environmental conditions is the same struggle for cultural spaces, for urban mobility, for housing. So these are all the same elements of the much wider fight. So we need to unite these and understand each other. And that's what we are trying to do. Another thing was the moment when the movement that I was part of decided to enter the political arena and to take over the institutions. So basically, Don't Let Belgrade Drown and Dajmo Beograd became the only left-green party in Serbia in the seat with the seats in the city hall in Belgrade and on the national level, even though it didn't have a very strong campaign on the national level. So people recognize the trust that they can have in the people coming from the bottom up and making the whole political campaign out of, like a crowdfunding campaign and voluntary basis, addressing the real needs of the people that are living in this country, and not like some imagined investors and tourists and bright and progressive future which we never live in.
Okay.
Maybe I sound pessimistic, but I'm actually a very optimistic person. So that's why
don't
I'm
worry.
still living here.
We are listening. We are just listening. We are still alive, and we are supporting you. So you can share your struggles with us. Maybe now girls from Onkraj gradbišča and Gaia could explain a little bit how they feel about influencing the design and the build process in this context. So do you think that you can actually somehow implement or have some impact on the projects that will grow there, or you already had some impact? I don't know, but I would like to hear about that. Since you used the place for so long, for me it would make sense that someone would ask you first, what do you think it's smart to do here, but I'm not sure if that's what happened.
Maybe it's interesting to explain how we are at the moment, or the position at the moment, because we have to move out, and in the frame of how would you say, in the frame of some municipal changing of spatial plans, we of course use this opportunity because you can publicly propose corrections and comment, and we propose that of course it would be very wise from the municipality to keep this space a green space, a green public space, a park. And we were somehow rejected with this proposal, but we had a second proposal which was not so ambitious maybe for them, and this was that the municipality would keep the land, would not sell the land to the developers, but would keep it and somehow give it to sub I'm looking for the words. For public housing fund.
So you mean no private investors?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yeah. So they somehow agreed on this proposal. So at the moment, the land which belongs to the municipality is going to be somehow officially transferred to the public fund for public housing. So in the future here there will be built 2 blocks of the apartments, and we were somehow invited to propose also how if we can, to propose some ideas that would be important maybe from our experience for this environment that will be there, and the buildings that will be there. And so we are now at the moment, there will be an open call for the architecture, and we hope that some of our proposals will be incorporated already in this open call, but it's not, nothing is really written down or something at the moment. Maybe you add.
Yeah, I would just like to connect actually what Polonca was explaining about our now finishing of community garden beyond the construction site, also with your previous question about the rights of nature. So on one side, as a temporary special initiative starting 12 years ago, we first never were expecting that we would last 12 years as it happened, and also that we would manage to keep the land in public ownership as also happened. So this, for my personal opinion, is a big impact of temporary community garden initiative. As Polonca explained, our first proposal to the municipality within the updating of the city spatial plan was to keep this area as a public green area, because especially this quarter, this neighborhood really lacks the green spaces. And I would like to say that actually the reasoning, the argumentation that the city rejected this proposal was that actually it's not in the line with the sustainable plans of the city development, exactly, that it's not in the line of sustainable development of the city of Ljubljana to keep here green, because the city has a policy to condense the construction in the city and to build on so-called degraded areas, which our area is still considered as a degraded area, even though it is overgrown with more than 100 trees and other plants. And yeah, they accepted the proposal to build non-profit apartments, which is in the light of housing crisis, affordable housing crisis in Ljubljana, also very important, because public housing fund of the city of Ljubljana usually does not build in the city center, but in the periphery where the land is cheaper. So this is also important, but also what I want to connect now with your question about the rights of nature is that I see really like initiative as Krater super important, especially in this light of really building the discourse and pointing the focus on the question of importance of biodiversity in close connection to so-called degraded areas, you know. And through this, I think also what is important is that we and the decision makers and inhabitants and so on learn about different notions of green in the city. So beyond city forest, beyond city parks, beyond, I don't know, usual greening between the blocks, but yeah, about different notions of city green, and through this also about what is beautiful, what is not beautiful, what is appropriate in the city, and so on. So I think this is still a long process. Also to implement some of these notions of, let's say, wild in the city, in also planning, but I think, yeah, it will have to happen. I don't know if you...
Do you have something to add, Gaia, or can we continue with Deborah? How do you feel? Or maybe Primož? No? Okay. Then I would like to continue from here with Deborah, actually, because third landscapes considered, as you just said, considered as wastelands, as something without value, at least for the municipality or so on. But what you propose is that a city could actually be a farm, like a whole city. Can you imagine that? And
yes.
what would happen on that level? Because that would also be profitable in a way. So maybe that would be interesting for investors, but that's where the capital comes in and we have problem again. So what if that happens?
Well, when we call ourselves Urbanihoeve, the city is our farm, we don't mean intensive agriculture, and we don't mean about professional production. We believe very strongly in the decommodification of food. That does not mean that, and the decommodification of land, and land for food, agricultural land as well. So that does not mean that farmers don't get paid. It means that farmers are very well paid to steward lands. Care workers, land stewards that are taking care of spaces absolutely get paid to produce a landscape that is appropriate to this time, which is not a lawn, and that's cut and mown 22 times, rain or shine, by design, but that is a meadow that's supporting threatened species and providing nectarways and habitats for birds and this snake and that kind of ground mammal. And so what it could be, the way I imagine it, is a very decommodified space. I do have the hope that this will happen. I don't believe this is going to be a simple trajectory either. That is not really on the horizon for a lot of planners, thinking that all of this space could be usable as a space that buffers us against the effects of climate crisis, against urban heat island, and that it fixes our the food deserts that, in the case of Amsterdam, this space is. I do believe that there's hope in changing the perspective through educating these a lot of these civil servants and what climate crisis really means. It seems really far away for a lot of them. We have also civil servants that I've worked with, some of them who are brilliant thinkers and very flexible and wonderful allies and creative. But some of them don't know what photosynthesis is. Amsterdam employs 17,000 civil servants. It's the largest employer in Amsterdam. And one can imagine that this is a huge spectrum of professions, and it represents a huge spectrum of educations and perspectives and kinds of people. It's really hard for people that don't know what photosynthesis is to understand what climate crisis is and what is going on right now. It is hard when scientific boards don't include the social sciences regularly, as we saw in the COVID, in the pandemic that happened, most recent pandemic. There will be more to come. When social sciences are not involved in the science thinking, so that techno-science and technocratic thinking has the upper hand. And that really controls the tenor of how green spaces are. So yes, I can imagine, and our allies can imagine all of these spaces. We can imagine an Amsterdam that's 10 degrees cooler, where there is no nutritional crisis, which translates into certain parts of our city, whether they are green or not, having a completely different health profile than other parts of the city, which maybe have much less green. And that is absolutely ridiculous. In such a wealthy city, that should not be happening at all. So we can imagine this, but it's a long road ahead to imagine implementing it.
Probably there are some, sorry, I just wanted to add one sentence, you can continue then, but I think that there should be some changes in the law department also. So maybe we should start formulate some suggestions slowly and try to put them into the practice. But yeah, continue please.
Yeah, before we were talking about the degraded plots of land in the city, and for example, as Onkraj gradbišča is still considered, and also Krater is considered to be a degraded piece of land. But yeah, for example, on Krater we have counted over 130 species of plants. We have 20 species of birds. We have 13 species of butterflies. We have more than 20 species of fungi. And there is a lot of other organisms there that we haven't yet found, that haven't cataloged or taken note that they exist. But for example, these kind of places are actually really rich in life, a lot richer than, for example, a city park or something, when you have a closely cut, neatly cut grass and stuff like that. And yeah, it's really ridiculous if you think about it, that this piece of land has no worth, or the nature there has no worth by itself, but it's like full of life, also full of materials. For example, as we were exploring through our collaboration for the Biennale of Industrial Design, For example, this cup is made from the clay that is found of Krater, so it's full of materials, it's full of life, it's full of, and it has also the other functions as cooling of the city, preventing of the heat islands. It has effect on the microclimate and stuff like that. So I think and also it has a potential. As Debra explained, like we are doing some small amount of farming on Krater. Also, we have a greenhouse for growing up seedlings of vegetables. We are growing some mushrooms. We are growing some pumpkins and stuff like that. But yeah, we can also in a city establish places that are biodiverse and they provide habitat for animals and plants and fungi and all the other creatures that we found in nature, and also can be beneficial for us for, I don't know, production of food, for relaxation, for being a community space and stuff like that. This is something that I wanted to add to conversation.
Yeah, I agree, but what I wanted to add is that when I try to work as municipal urban planner, and when I want to make a place like this, or leave something green somewhere, other people from community will oppose this, or my co-workers will oppose this because they don't see any profit in it, or they say, oh my God, another green patch, who will mow this every 2 months? It's too much work. Let's put some pavement on it. That's the logic that works most of the time. So that's why I'm asking, what would be the way, to put this thinking into the law, into spatial plans of the municipalities? Because even if you want to work like that, at the end of the day, you can't, because you have to follow the words written in this book, which is there from 90s sometimes. So
that's really a huge question. I don't have an answer for it. But on the other hand, I think there is some changes already happening. Urška mentioned before the need to establish new aesthetics. Also, what we perceive as a beautiful park, can a place like Krater be considered beautiful? For example, one of the interesting things that we work on Krater notice a lot of times when the people come to Krater from the street that is paved and a lot of concrete and ornamental trees and stuff like that, and then they walk in, they are somehow amazed how much wild nature there is in the middle of the city. So I think there is a lot of people who recognize the importance and the beauty of these kind of places. But and another important factor that will have effect on this, I think, it's also the environmental crisis that we are in, because the need to, or the drive or the motivation for establishing of a new perspective, what is beautiful and what is not beautiful, will also be come from some existential crisis of our society, I would say. But maybe somebody can add something to this.
I think I can just add the fact that I think there is a great power in self-organized civic initiatives that are pushing and actually showing what is possible, and also willing to kind of start the conversations with the municipalities or
there's
ministries
sure a lot of
and
work.
so on. Sorry?
That's sure a lot of work to start something from nothing, basically, and
Yeah, I think a lot of our drives based on kind of our motivation to kind of really try to contribute in the best way we can. Of course, there is a lot of voluntary work included and so on. But somehow I just wanted to say that I think just by actually doing it and showcasing it, we already have a really strong argument to start the conversation going. And as Urška and Polonca explained kind of their outcome of the negotiation, that I think is wonderful. I think also Krater is, with the conference and the work that it's doing on the site, trying to actually step in conversation with stakeholders and kind of see with lawyers, with ecologists, with landscape architects and architects, how can we actually start to shift this this mindset, because it's about shifting the mindset. We need to start to change the condition in which we are operating. If we can see what it, I think it's really interesting with the new building that is going to be built on the Krater site and will excavate like the whole life. It will, the whole life on Krater will probably extinct by this intervention. And it was not, you know, about the architects that they did the bad architecture. It's like far from that. It was like the condition on which they were responding with their work, or kind of, you know, not giving them the chance to include the multi-species whole within the design work that they were asked to do. So there is like there are many steps back where we need to start, but I think in the same way, like we can start from everywhere where we are at the moment. So as designers, as administration, as ministers, as urbanists, I think we have the power and some sort of a duty, so to speak, to kind of start shifting the current agenda. So in this regards, I cannot say like how we might intervene, but because we're in the middle of the process. But already, I think to kind of start the Feral Palace conference was a way of, you know, making the first step or making some sort of a regenerative intervention into the accepted norm of what was going to happen or is going to happen. And us sitting here and so on is kind of starting again another conversation to figuring out how we can, you know, start shifting.
That's a very optimistic saying, and I love it, so I won't try to add anything more. I just have actually the final question, but this one goes to everyone, also to Eva. So at the end, let's try and imagine that we are the people who are writing this new law of greening for every city. And I just wanted like few ideas, what would be the main design principles of the future urban planning. And as you said before, that was actually in my question, do we still care about aesthetics? How do we change that? Do we completely forget that? And maybe how can we step back and leave some space for coincidence in the planning? Because right now I think that everything is super designed to the last detail, even when it's not needed. So how should we actually practice care? Who will start? Maybe Eva, you can start.
Well, that's a difficult question. Yeah, we didn't even reach the level of aesthetics in our discussion. It's more about protecting the green infrastructure and try to fight against its negative effects. So to move discussion from economic parameters to social parameters, because the negative effects are really surreal and very alarming. So it's from air pollution to temperature increasing to consumption due to cooling and so on. So it's not about only about jeopardizing the quality of life, but also how it will influence the public health. So there is like the whole system of things that you need to think about. So for the beginning, I mean, like there is no way that the cosmetic interventions will solve the problem, but like very radical ways of creating policies, like stop building in a density areas, like for good stop building because they're already built. So don't do that, and then use a technological system which can like help the green areas that stay there to survive. And then make the percentage that you want to reach, let's say like 50% of the city surface should be under the green infrastructure, which is not much. When we proposed that in the campaign, I thought that's for real 50% and we only have 12. But then I looked at the general plan of Berlin and Vienna, and they have 50% of the city surface is basically green. So it is possible if you put the effort and you can reach this level. So these kind of changes also, just to give a bit of context, these environmental issues in Serbia until recently were really not like the topic, because people here would say we have more serious problem, than the climate issues. which is true. We have a lot of problems, but this is also a serious problem. And then it started somehow. And when we did this public poll opinion that I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation a year ago, every second citizen of Belgrade find this the most important issue. So it obviously it resonates with the wider public. And also there is no negotiations between should we have a green area or a parking slot. Even though the parking and the traffic in general in Belgrade it's crazy, somehow it became an important thing in people's minds. So through different campaigns and organizational efforts, it became an issue, and the reason why people protest and gather and start defending their green areas. So now we like policies who will just like put this profit making in the first place in designing.
Okay, that's a great statement, I think. Deborah wants to continue. So.
Yes, going along with this, I think that 50% is not enough. By any stretch of the imagination. I think that the regeneration that needs to happen in our cities should be much higher. And I think that we should aim to lower in a very short period of time, and I know that it's possible in 2-3 years. I think we should aim in summer temperature to lower the temperature by 10 degrees of our cities. And that sounds like a lot. And then we don't have to talk about what is green, what is a green space, what is a degraded space. In fact, in our situation, some of the mowing transformations that we've made, it has people worried that we are in fact taking a lawn, a design space of no ecological value whatsoever, and turning it into a degraded space. So I think, instead of changing all these bizarro policies that shouldn't be there in 2022 at all, in fact, or even maybe 2 decades, or maybe since 1972 they shouldn't have been there. What we can say is let's just lower the temperature by 10 degrees. Obviously, the way you do that is not by painting green as a landscape architecture, and even the kind of beautiful examples that we see, I won't name any names, of making these perennial polycultures that are very beautiful, and certain museums love them and so forth, but they don't lower they don't provide nectarways, they don't lower the temperature. So maybe without presuming to know the actual, and that it's a simple thing, this mean temperature lowering is one thing. And the other thing is maybe not to consider these spaces as a space of coincidence. I hear what you're saying about the overly designed, but I really think in a Lefebvrean sense that we need spaces for increased encounter. And when I read this, I think of the multi-species whole, and I think of all the surface areas as being spaces of encounter, all the little microorganisms that we can't see and we can barely sense, all the yeasts flying in the air that inhabit our own guts, our skin, and keep us healthy, and are scientifically proven to keep us healthy. All of these spaces are spaces of encounter. So increasing the green tissues in this highly diverse way will lower the temperatures. We use the temperature as a marker. We know that the only way to do that is to have these multi-layers of native, rewilded green tissues. That might be some kind of policy that we could, it's something that could be written down.
I'm writing it down, don't worry.
Deborah, you said 50% of green is not enough for a city. Ljubljana municipality likes to say that Ljubljana is around 70% green. But actually, what we have to acknowledge is that this is basically because of the natural given, like because of the city forests and pre-city, like close to the city forests, and also as part of the outcome of the spatial planning back in socialist Yugoslavia. But like I live in northern part of the city in Šiška, where a lot of construction sites are going on, and none of them has green as part of also this development and planning, except some like better standing housing projects. So this is also very dangerous, that this class division, green division happens in planning, so that the rich parts of the city have green and poorer part of the city not. But yeah, I'm cultural worker. I observe the city. I don't have like, I don't know, and I don't want to give kind of prescriptions about how the spatial planning should run. But maybe just as an inspiration, I would invite my dear friend and colleague Polonca, if you can tell about her project, A Plan with a Goat. This is also how actually we started thinking about how to plan the area where our community garden took place in a different way. So
is a humorous artistic comment of urban planning, and immediately when we opened our construction site, I decided that we should follow nature, I could say, but I decided to follow a goat because the terrain was really dramatic, like in Krater, so there were already holes and the slopes and dangerous for, or I don't know, not easy going terrain. And one day I spent there with a goat that I followed, and I drew the line where she was sitting and standing and eating, and I made a proposal based on her movement around. So that was in some way also very challenging, related to architecture, because you can imagine architects, the base is a net, orthogonal net, and this efficient planning of things, and you can imagine the goat was not at all rectangular. Yeah, so that's it.
Back to the greening handbook ideas.
I think I need to represent like the cultural and precarious workers here, because somehow, yeah, it's actually, I'm entering this practice as a like curious explorer and kind of somebody who has a great connection with and to nature, but in a way I'm not an expert in this regards, but I am a cultural worker, and I know that I think kind of all of the community kind of sitting here, we're working in very interesting or not so supportive conditions. So in this regards, I think as an NGO and also as a freelancer, you know, it would be really interesting to think of some sort of different working modalities where people who are putting so much care into the landscapes and raising all of these issues that are so important are also able to self-sustain themselves and work in health and be healthy, and also kind of provide health to others in that regards. I think it would be interesting to think of kind of some sort of I don't know, universal income that could maybe be provided for the care workers in the cities or in towns, which could then basically support their own work through a regular and secure income. So I think this would be very necessary as an intervention in the greening book as well.
Where to start? Yeah, I would totally agree with Deborah about greening the cities and lowering the temperature. When you asked the question, I was thinking again from the point of view of climate change and environmental crisis. I think in addition to temperature, I think water is also one of the aspects that we have to address. As we see in Ljubljana in recent times, we have storms, and then, you know, for example, the passageway in Celovška is every time underwater and there is a car stuck in it, and, you know, we have floods in basements of buildings and stuff like that. So we should do something about water in connection with green spaces, because this water can, if you slow it down and give it an option to soak into the ground, it can be a storage of water for the drier climates that are coming. And then on another hand, I think, yeah, we have to think about public spaces, about communities, so they can develop, about accessibility and public transport, and about the production of energy. And, you know, there is so much aspects when you're thinking. I think we should redesign our cities completely, you know. For example, as I mentioned in the beginning, the composting toilet and the regular toilet, and how much water is wasted, and on the other hand, how much nutrients is flushed down the drain. Maybe, you know, we need a new concept of sewage system and stuff like that. So I think it's now, I think it's really time for innovation and to start thinking outside of the box if we want to adapt to if we want to, how can I say, have a good life also in the times that are coming.
Polonca, would you like to add something?
No, maybe just of course, networking and working together with similar initiatives is very, very important, and I think powerful tool also. So not to be alone, but to be supported, and I think this opportunity is exactly something that develops this networking, and yeah.
Okay, so now I have to tell you that I'm treating this as a meeting, a very official meeting, and I will write this stuff down and I will send it to all of you, and then you will read it again and tell me if it's okay, the Greening Manifesto, and then we will start to work on it from here, okay? I hope Eva agrees. Eva from Belgrade, I think she agrees. We'll start with
totally.
her. Okay, great. So this is where my questions end, and now I'd like to ask the public if there is someone who wants to know more about something. Anyone? I'm sure Danica has a question. I can't see actually, so.
Okay, I always have a question. Thank you for all your inspiring thoughts, and for, you know, like, it's wonderful to see people that think alike. But I'll have a kind of a question or a proposal, because I think it's very nice that we talk to people who think alike, and it's very nice that we educate civil servants, but I don't think we have time for this. So, like, I'm thinking from the other end, because searching into the history of architecture and planning, you can also see that there is like times, which is breaks, that you have new general plans for cities. So actually we do see that actually the plans that we do have absolutely do not work. So I don't think we can educate, you know, of course it's good to educate people, but isn't it like a time of crisis in which we actually say, look, this doesn't work, so we need a new general plan that we have to envision under new circumstances which couldn't have been thought about 10 years ago. So could that be like a strategy, or like on a national or even on an international level, sort of not only bottom up, but also like a top down perspective that can probably be achieved only politically, I think. Like just one note to think about. Should I give this back?
Feel like answering? Because maybe I work for the municipality, so I can maybe speak for the top-down side, but I'm double agent, so it's a bit funny situation. They don't know what to do with me exactly. Yeah, the whole apparatus of the bureaucracy is so huge that people get tired when they just open the spatial plan of the city and they get sick and they get tired and they want to go home. And right now we just finished with the 5th changes of this plan, and those changes took 5 years, and they are the 5th changes. So now you can count how many changes, and yeah, so it's still the same document, and they are just making small reparations, beautifying of it, throwing something out because someone said so, putting something in because it's modern, but the concept of the document is the same. So it's a complicated process. I think it's absolutely necessary to do that, what you said, but I have no idea how to convince them, because I'm trying and I'm not sure that I will succeed right now. So it's funny.
Can I jump in?
Please do.
It's me from behind. Yes. I think that only by making a huge pressure you can make a difference. And for pressure, you need to mobilize people. And to mobilize people, you need to convince them that that's important and why it is important. And then from there, you gain legitimacy to ask for the changes of the general plan. I know in our context, the general plan is a strategic document. So it should bring visions and not go into details, which is exactly what is happening in Belgrade as well. It is produced every 20 years and it goes into details instead of like saying where we see ourselves in 20 years. But how I understand general urban plan is that this is like a lifetime opportunity to discuss, like all of us to discuss as a society about the priorities, our priorities and values, and where we see ourselves in which kind of city in 20 years. We had a campaign run for 3 years in regarding of the current plan that is to be adopted, and it took a lot of effort to address the issues since they are very abstract to the common people. So you really need to find the ways of how you're explaining what are the main things people should be aware, how they can react, how they can improve the plan itself. But I mean, that's a huge effort, but I see it as a very important. I would also like to share an example from ex-Yugoslavia and the general plan of Belgrade from 1972. We call it the Golden Plan. That was a plan that was drafted 6 years, and it included like dozens and hundreds of international academic conferences, expert conferences, and local conferences on the issues of priorities on how cities should be developed in 20 years. But it also included city assemblies and bringing the plan into every single neighborhood of Belgrade and introducing the content of it to people who don't understand what it is. And that's why it got like all these inputs from everyone, basically everyone was involved. That was called the Golden Plan because it was based on the real needs and on the real things that were happening around, and people were happy with it. It takes a lot of time, but then you have a document that you can stand behind and that directs the future development of the city. And that's basically the idea of the general plan.
Thank you, Eva. We all agree. I'll write that down too. Absolutely. Any more questions from the public? Danica, still not. I see 2 hands now. Yes.
I do.
Go ahead.
Now the technology.
Thank you so much. I have a question about if you would speak to how would you define success? How do you measure it? The measurement, because we are in this very challenging situation of, I think it was Deborah who spoke about the science and the divisions between who gets to work on these challenges. The quantitative and qualitative measures are giving a lot of challenge. How would you speak to this? How do you measure success?
Okay, how would I measure success? Definitely through qualitative examples. No, I don't know that I'm actually a good person to answer this question definitively, but I would imagine if we think of a measurement of success, that we need to have a post-disciplinary, multidisciplinary approach to thinking about what success is going to be. That I can say. That it's not, in the Netherlands we fall prey to this techno-managerial thinking very often, and these are simple answers to very simple frames of societal questions, and I don't think that is a good way forward.
No, it won't be scientific perspective or anything. It's my personal one, but I think success for me, for example, is in one hand health of the environment, and on another hand the well-being and health of human beings who live in the environment. And by environment I also mean nature and ecosystems and everything. And I think that, yeah, if we work with living beings, we are living beings, and if we are taking care of well-being of all living beings around us, and we are successful in enhancing life, I would define that as success. And I think we should not, how can I say, be too philosophical about it, because, yeah, it can lead into strange ways.
Yes, Katja, I'm here. So you called my name. There's so much time that I need to tell something. Thank you so much for this very meaningful conversation. I'm looking at you now at the stage. There is one artist, I believe, Deborah, you started. Your background is in art, yeah? That's true. Urška, you're actually art historian. Primož is permaculture and microbiologist. The guy is a designer, and Polonca, you're an architect? And artist, yes. And Katja, you're an architect. Okay. And we are talking about the rights of nature and about spontaneous nature. There is no landscape architects actually with us at the moment. There is no lawyers at the moment here. So how, and me with Gaia and we talked a lot, okay, how people do perceive our work. We are like some hippie community there, hanging out at the site. So what are we actually doing in that sense? Why our argument coming from our backgrounds, which are actually rooted in arts, are relevant? Why they're relevant? Why we consider ourselves relevant actually to speak really loudly and really good and about these questions, and why we are the ones in this society to drive this debate. This is actually what interests me. And also, it is the same with Eva, who is an activist from Belgrade, not only an architect, yeah, and many other things you need to do the work that she explained.
Well, I think that our fields have the potential, in our educations, in art education, most definitely, also in different versions of design education, we are taught to be researchers. We do embodied research. We're on-site living our work. We take it very seriously. Our knowledge is very, very deep on locations and interventions. We will talk to anyone. So we have, because I don't think this is a good thing, but because we're precarious, we don't have 9 to 5. Some of us don't have a framework, a labor framework, which would prevent us from missing out on some serendipity in a research project. So we get a very rich research field. And the subjects that we're discussing are very complex. So I think that our professional nature and preparation and inspiration prepares us for this working climate. In that sense, I think it's extremely relevant. We are not afraid of learning new things. We're not afraid of being new at something and diving in and discovering that we're wrong. In fact, we're excellent at failing, and we're not daunted by this failing. Maybe that's also a better answer to this idea of the success. It's maybe actually the failure that, not in the large sense. We're not making a grand projet and then failing. We are making smaller, so many, a fabric of experiments where we experience, where we gain our knowledge through certain kinds of failure and success. So in that sense, I think we're absolutely the people for the job. We have different, we are less impeded by legacies, like why is there not a landscape architect on the stage? I mean, we all probably know some landscape architects that are doing wonderful work. We have a permaculture person on the stage instead, and we all have experience with permaculture and regenerative agriculture. We have less entanglements or anchors to legacies which brought us to this situation in the first place. That's a partial, possible answer.
I would be, I don't know, I feel like to be more humble on this question. I don't know, maybe because arts and culture can bring many different voices together from many different fields, and these burning questions, which are burning questions for our future, have to be intersectional and cross over. But you said we are here relevant voices, but if I use this language, I feel my voice is relevant just because of my experience that I shared today here with you. But I'm sure, it's also a question of line up. I mean, who was invited to speak here? A voice of an ecological farmer would be also relevant, or a landscape architect and so on, spatial planners and so on. So this is, I have to somehow share this discomfort regarding this question.
If my voice is relevant, I don't know. I don't think it is. I think the things that I recognize as relevant are, relevant to me, and then I talk about them. But if it's relevant to others, I think that's their decision. I would say I don't really think about so much about relevancy. I think that also would, I don't know. I don't want to be, how do you call it in English? you know, yeah, I want to be humble about it. I don't want to say that my voice is like really relevant. I have knowledge and I have experience and I observe things happening around me, and of course I want to talk about them because I perceive those things as relevant, but you know, as I said.
I think, like, yeah, what is interesting to point out is that actually what we're about to and are already embarking is kind of a shift in how we produce our cultures. And I guess, like, as culture workers, in a sense, we have to question ourselves of what kind of cultures are we producing as architects, as designers, as everyone who is kind of in the field of arts and design and architecture. So in this regard, I think it's just, you know, it's a necessary question for all of our practices. And of course, when we start to question this divide of nature and culture, we quickly understand that we cannot answer those questions alone. So we need to sort of connect with others and find ecologists and find landscape architects, lawyers, and all of the rest to kind of, frame the questions together. But I think through our practice, what was also really important was that to find allies within those disciplines, because you have such and such biologists and you have such and such designers and so on. So it's not just a matter of connecting with the disciplines, but actually a matter of connecting with people who are willing to embark on the same eco-social project of regeneration. So yeah, I don't know. I think in a sense it's really interesting that that art has this capacity to lead, or not even lead, but kind of to initiate all of those things, because I think what another thing that it can actually do is, like, it's normally, it knows how to communicate well, it knows how to attract, it knows how to persuade, and in this sense I think it has like a tremendous power to actually activate many things that maybe some sort of, I don't know, disciplines that are more like coming from the natural sciences, or I don't know, are not able to communicate well enough, or so I think there are different roles, or where like this creative or like artistic part can come as an important supporter of the common project.
Maybe just just to add that I think it's good that you do it with some sort of passion also. So I think all these initiatives that started, they have this goal with a lot of energy and passion to succeed. So I think this is also part of the success, that you just do it with your heart and somehow it's come to some results.
I guess this means the end of the conference, since I have both mics in my hands. So now this is the last call, if anybody wants to add anything. Otherwise, I'll say thank you to our guests. I think this was really inspiring, and I'm so happy that Danica invited me to meet you, because I don't live in Ljubljana and it's a bit of driving, but it was absolutely worth it. And I will, as I said, write down what we discussed before, and we'll be in contact, because I think we could do some change eventually if we join forces. Thank you.
Ciao, thank you.